Անձավակության խնդիր ունեք, դիմեք փորձառու մասնագետ բժիշկ Վիգեն Սեպիլյանին։ Դոկտոր Վիգեն Սեպիլյանի ամլության բուժման կենտրոնը գտնվում է Գլենդելում, 1560 East Chevy-Chase հասցեում։ Այստեղ կարող են դիմել երեխա ունենալու դժվարություններ ունեցող զույգերը։ Մի կորցրեք երջանիկ ծնող դառնալու ձեր հնարավորությունը։ Դիմեք Վիգեն Սեպիլյանին։ Ժամադրության համար զանգահարեք 818 303 6400 հեռախոսահամարով։
Welcome to Stay Healthy TV. I'm Dr. Vicken Sepilian, your host. Today we have in the studio Ms. Anita Avedian, who's a licensed marriage and family therapist. Anita, welcome to our program.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sepilian.
So Anita specializes in anger management, and one of her specialties as well is social anxiety and disorders related to that. Previously on this program, we've had Anita talk about anger management. She does practice here in Southern California and is the director of Anger Management 818 with multiple locations throughout the area. But today we wanted to focus on social anxiety. Now, what is social anxiety?
Social anxiety disorder is when a person really fears going into social situations. They worry about someone judging them, perhaps judging them that they're stupid or not good enough, or what they're saying is very boring. So there's a lot of fears around social situations. It can involve performance. It can involve eating in front of people. Are they judging with how I'm eating or how I'm chewing? So there's a lot of fear of judgment or being humiliated or embarrassing themselves. And so it keeps them, even though they're interested in making friends and having a support system, so they definitely have the interest in going out there, but they have so much fear around what can go wrong in those interactions, and therefore it keeps them from making friends, it keeps them from a lot of things, which we'll get into, but it's a pretty serious, it's a pretty serious disorder when it comes to support systems and having people around you.
Now, let me ask you, how prevalent is it?
Currently, in the United States, statistically, it's about 8%, or sorry, 6.8% of people right now in this year have it. But in someone's lifespan, there's a 13% chance people will have it.
Wow,
and
so that's quite
it's
high.
It's the third highest mental health disorder. I once read fourth, but most of the statistics read as the third highest. So the leading causes of mental health are depression. and the alcohol addiction. But this is your third highest prevalent in the United States. So it's a pretty serious and common.
And this is there any differences in the genders?
So we see that there are twice as many women as men who experience social anxiety, but there are actually twice as many men than women who actually seek treatment. And it makes sense because you have men who are wanting to be promoted at the workplace, and they're realizing why they're not able to speak up, and so it's impacting them getting promoted at the workplace. It's impacting them asking for women out or men out. So it keeps them from dating and speaking up, and so they realize how badly it's impacting them. And so in my social anxiety group that I hold weekly, we have mostly men, even though there's twice as many women who suffer from it.
That's true, and those are great points that you brought up. A man may be less assertive in asking for a promotion they deserve, or a raise, or dating, asking a woman out on a date, and or a man out on a date, and so essentially, these are ways that social anxiety can truly interfere in one's, ability to grow as a person.
Right.
Yeah. So, what's the difference between someone being shy versus them having social anxiety?
I think it's so interesting where a lot of people end up confusing or mixing shyness with social anxiety. Shyness is a personality trait. People could be shy but not have social anxiety, versus social anxiety is an actual disorder. It's keeping someone from going to that social function, from making friends, from interacting. But someone who's shy can go to those parties. They're just a little bit shy. It doesn't keep them from doing those things. And so the main thing to know is if you take all the shy people, only 12% of those people will say, yeah, I suffer with social anxiety. So you see that some people who have shyness also have social anxiety, and then you see some people with social anxiety who don't have shyness. So I've seen both, where you see shyness, no social anxiety, no shyness, and then those who have both, who suffer with both. But really, one's a personality trait and the other is an actual disorder that we can treat and work towards.
Now, in terms of, the actual symptoms, when does it typically present?
The median is at age 13. So for 75% of the people, it can start around age 8 all the way to 15. That's your 75% of your population. Some children will experience it when they're younger and some in the adulthood. What's interesting is I end up seeing, so clients who come to me, for example, for this social anxiety group I have, during the intakes, I realize either they stopped drinking, they stopped using, and then all of a sudden they realize, wait a minute, I don't know how to talk to people. I'm actually very uncomfortable, and there's all this fear of judgment occurring. And that's when they realize they have social anxiety. So they've had it this whole time, but they didn't know it because they're at these parties drinking constantly, not realizing.
It got unmasked somehow.
Exactly. There's also ones where just during those college years, they went from high school with having a group of friends, and now they're in college. Well, wait a minute, they have to make new friends now. And that's when they start realizing, how do you approach someone? How do you make new friends? And that fear starts to kick in about the being judged, the rejection. There's a huge fear of rejection, what happens then? And so I see a lot of people coming to treatment in their early 20s, sometimes in their 40s and 50s. And I've noticed the people who come in later in life is because they still haven't dated, or they're struggling with the dating life, and because or they stopped using, and all of a sudden they're realizing
it's unmasked.
It's unmasked, right?
Now, is there a genetic component to this?
There definitely is. So there is a genetic component in that. I think 1/3 of the underlying causes of social anxiety is genetic. They haven't found the actual chromosome as they have in panic disorder and agoraphobia, but that's to be coming, I would imagine, because they have very similar symptoms. But they have found that those who have a first-degree family member, mom, dad, sibling, who also has social anxiety, that person is 2 or 3 times more likely to have social anxiety. So they're more prone to it. It's in the genes, but they haven't found the details yet.
The
but
actual
that
gene
seems to be coming.
that contributes to it. Now, in terms of other than genetics, gender, we talked about the onset of age and the various clustering within age groups. What else contributes to social anxiety?
So there's several different things, and we'll try to cover the different elements. So the family history we kind of talked about, part of it has to do with the genes. The other component is they have negative experiences. So think about all the bullying that goes on. That child who gets bullied or teased or humiliated, and there are people laughing at them, that's going to contribute to the social anxiety. Even if there's a lot of moving around as a child. So for those people who move schools and move cities and locations, and the family kind of has to move around, let's say, that person is more prone to having social anxiety because they're constantly having to get into a new circle, loss of friends, making new friends, and it's not always easy to do that. And at some point, a person starts to feel more uncomfortable and trying to figure out how to get through in that scenario. So those are the negative experiences. We also want to look at temperament. So we see that children, when the temperament is, for example, shy or timid or withdrawn, especially when they're meeting new people, there's new situations, that person may be more prone to having social anxiety later in life. New social or work demands. All of a sudden you're hired at this workplace, and this company is saying, Dr. Sepilian, we would like for you to make all these presentations. Now, you would have no problem with this at all, we know this, but
I
there
have
are
problems with it all the time.
People who, they may not show up to work the next day because they're not going to want to do that. And so that becomes a big threat. So that same person didn't realize they ever had social anxiety, and they may have never had it, but all of a sudden there's these requests, we want you to go and speak in front of all these people or sell this thing to these people, and they start to realize, oh boy, this is getting really uncomfortable, and so much so they can't sleep. The anxiety is so strong they can't function properly, and they want to avoid going back to work and eventually lose their work.
Right.
There's one more that I do want to cover, and that is for those who have a health condition that draws people's attention to them. So for someone who, let's say, may have skin burns on their face, something that's very visible, a facial disfiguration of the face, someone who stutters, where they get embarrassed of, are people judging me? Can they understand what I'm saying? So it can be someone who didn't have social anxiety, but all of a sudden
acquires it.
They can acquire that because of that. And so we want to, just notice if there's anything around that may be happening, because of course there's also the fear of being judged, and even when we talk about the public speaking, the fear of people noticing that they're anxious. A person who blushes easily, not everyone blushes. But the person who blushes easily, that's a huge fear for them, because it's an obvious, everyone's going to know, right? And so the more obvious that becomes, the scary that feels for them.
I think I'm blushing.
Not.
And environment as well.
Yeah, so environment, thank you for that. Environment also definitely plays a role. For some, we say it's a learned behavior. So if we have a parent who has social anxiety, or someone is modeling, like the peers are modeling for them that there's social anxiety, like they're scared to approach people, all of a sudden you start thinking, oh, maybe it's scary to approach people, I shouldn't approach them. And so you kind of start learning that same behavior from peers that otherwise you wouldn't have had. And so some part of it can be learned, among the Armenian, amuta, like it's shameful, don't do this, don't do that. And eventually it's, oh wait, people are going to think this is embarrassing, this is shameful, I shouldn't do this.
So essentially that was something that was imprinted on that individual by their, surroundings, whether it be friends or family members or whatever have you. And
I think there's also one more point around this, is sometimes when we see parents be controlling over their children or being overly protective, we start seeing that those same kids who've had those overly protective parents end up developing social anxiety, because the parents have kind of done the work for them.
Right.
Think about it. They get into something happens at school, someone teases them, the parent comes in, does all the work. Well, now this child didn't learn
the skills that it's necessary for them to actually do that.
Right.
That's a great point. Ladies and gentlemen, please stay with us. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be back with Anita Avedian.
Անզավակության խնդիր ունեք, դիմեք փորձառու մասնագետ բժիշկ Վիգեն Սեպիլյանին։ Դոկտոր Վիգեն Սեպիլյանի ամլության բուժման կենտրոնը գտնվում է Գլենդելում, 1560 East Cheviches հասցեում։ Այստեղ կարող են դիմել երեխա ունենալու դժվարություններ ունեցող զույգերը։ Մի կորցրեք երջանիկ ծնող դառնալու ձեր հնարավորությունը։ Դիմեք Վիգեն Սեպիլյանին։ Ժամադրության համար զանգահարեք 818 303 6400 հեռախոսահամարով։
Welcome back to our program, Stay Healthy TV. I'm Dr. Sepilian, your host. Today with us is Anita Avedian, who's a licensed marriage and family therapist. Anita, welcome back. We are talking about social anxiety, and we had talked about some of the causes. Some of it can be genetic, environmental, and whatever have you. Can this disorder go away by itself, or does it go away by itself?
It's rare. It can. It's really rare, because when you say does it go away by itself, if a person is exposing themselves to situations, chances are they'll probably work through it pretty well. Most of what we see is when someone has social anxiety, they start avoiding. They'll avoid the situation to not experience the anxiety. And then the more you avoid it, the more fearful you become of it, and the less you're able to go and seek support or have a support system. And so we highly recommend to get some form of help. There's self-help programs as well. There's one-on-one therapy. My preferred approach is a group therapy, because how much better can that be, where you have a group of people you can work through? It's exposure therapy, where you can work through some of your discomfort and share in common with other people what you are concerned with and your fears, so you don't feel alone in this disorder that so many people experience.
Right. Now, if it goes untreated, what are some of the consequences?
What we start seeing, at worst, people do attempt or commit suicide, and that's when it gets pretty bad, because they feel hopeless and helpless that they're not going to get a job or they're not ever going to be able to date. And but generally, we'll start seeing that there's low self-esteem. They may have trouble being assertive, so they're not approaching people, or they're not asking for a promotion at the workplace. There's a lot of negative self-talk, which eventually can then get into not just anxiety, but then depression, hypersensitivity to criticism. They'll really personalize what is being said to them because it's so difficult to hear something negative about them. Poor social skills, isolation in difficult social relationships, and a main one for students to know is a lot of times we'll see the grades, they suffer in grades because even going to school, they're too scared to ask a question to the professor or to the teacher, and then they're not really understanding what the school lesson plan is, and we see that they start suffering with the grades because of it. Or projects that involve a group of people, team projects, or public speaking project, forget it. They'll probably avoid that, and so we start seeing them suffer in those areas.
I see. Now, we touched on this earlier, but when do you see people come and seek help?
So usually, especially when a person just transitions into college, or they leave college and now there's no place for them to start making friends unless they really put themselves out there. So a lot of times I'll see people around ages 18 to 23, 24 seeking for help. So most of my clients who seek for my help are in that age range. Or someone who's been using and all of a sudden they stopped using and they realize they're having difficulty in social situations. So they start realizing, I'm not comfortable talking to people. I don't even know what to talk about. What do you talk about where it's not going to be boring? Anita, I don't know what I can share that would be even of interest. And so there's a lot of that self-doubt. So what we start seeing is people realizing they're at home every day watching TV after work. When they're at the workplace, by the way, and there's a meeting, they'll do their best to show up exactly on time, because if they come a few minutes early, that means they have to talk to people. If they come a few minutes late, that means everyone's going to stare at them.
Yes.
Right? So the people who show up, doesn't mean you have social anxiety because you show up on time, but the people who show up on time are usually trying to work around the not being judged some way or another.
Right. Wow, yeah. Those are, such cues that probably most people wouldn't recognize, but now I'll keep that in mind.
Yes.
Now, what's been found to be effective in the treatment of social anxiety? I know we touched on this, and I happen to know that you're the only group therapist where you do treatment for this in a group setting in all of Los Angeles.
In Los Angeles area, I have been facilitating social anxiety groups for over 12 years. I finally found a person out in Orange County who does a group out there, and her and I met up, I forget, somewhere in the midpoint to kind of share notes on what works, what doesn't work, to improve, because usually this type of specialty, people may work with them individually, but here's the oxymoron. How do you start a group for social anxiety for people who are too anxious to be around people?
Right.
It is the most challenging group to start, I will tell you. So I've noticed on the average from when a person seeks out for help, which is usually 10 years after experiencing symptoms, they'll seek out for help on the average, that's 36% of people. They seek out for help 4 months later, they'll step foot into that office. And sometimes I've had it where we had to meet someone at the lobby to escort them up into the room because that was such a scary concept. So in Los Angeles, my preferred treatment is a group setup where you have the exposure in a comfortable and safe environment with a therapist who understands social anxiety and who can help through the skill building around it. And it's a place where you can practice through some of those learned skills. Now, one-on-one therapy will help as well, but not. I think that exposure to a group is what takes it to a next level. I think sometimes at UCLA I've seen a group randomly kind of start and end, but really I seek for therapists who provide this service because it's so unserved, and I could see why, because it is very tough to start a group. I'm fortunate enough because I've been doing it for some time where people make the referrals, but it's a very tough group to get started and to maintain.
Of course,
Yeah.
I can just imagine.
I mean, it's the, people are too scared to be around people. So,
Right.
but it's a beautiful thing to be in a group setting to provide cognitive behavioral skills. And the behavioral part, what I do once a month is we go out to a mall or an outing where there's a lot of people, and I actually have clients try out approaching people to try, actually there's a thing called rejection therapy, to ask for something that they know most likely they're going to get rejected for. And then we process what that was like for them to realize not a big deal. It's not as
Right.
bad as I thought it was.
That's
And
right.
when they start realizing that, they start taking more steps and more steps. So I've seen clients join Toastmasters, which is very scary to do for someone with social anxiety. And it's been great. It's been a great.
So cognitive behavioral therapy, that's when, you try to explain or have somebody understand the root of, the process and then have them act on it.
The cognitive part is going to be, for example, if my thought is they're going to laugh at me or I'm going to be boring, they're going to think I'm boring. So now the countering thought may be something like, wait a minute, I have things of interest to say. If they are bored of me, so what? Right? They'll just walk away. So it's the dealing with the rejection. So it's what we tell ourselves to help us through that process, to push us to be able to start taking those risks. Because without taking those risks, you're still kind of stuck in that same outcome of staying at home and not really having the support system that we need. We need connection. We need to have friends. We need to have
Right, of
someone
course.
to talk to.
And there are medicines that
Yes.
can be used to treat this.
Yeah, because there's neurotransmitters that play a big role. So what happens with people with anxiety, especially with social anxiety, is that the amygdala is just, it's hypersensitive, it's overly acting. So there's what you and I may perceive as it's okay, it's just a social situation, and it's okay if someone doesn't like what I said. For a person with social anxiety, that is the biggest, I can't handle if someone says they don't like something or look at me a certain way that they may not like it. And so they don't think as rationally. It's not proportionate to what it's not really dangerous for us, but for them it's a real danger. So that's where we start seeing the amygdala acting in ways that it's not going to be that way in other people. But so the neurotransmitters, the 4 neurotransmitters that play a role, which is why we look into medicine as an option, is norepinephrine, dopamine, serotonin, and GABA. So typically when one is treated with, sometimes they'll prescribe Paxil, and I don't want to talk about medicine because I'm not a psychiatrist, but there's medicine that's provided to help out with those situations.
Right.
And I think when a client is taking that medicine and they're trying out different behavioral things, then they start realizing this isn't as dangerous as I thought it was. So when they get off the medication, they're able to function
To cope
better.
better and ultimately the result being better. Yeah, this is a very important thing. I'm glad that we had the opportunity to talk. As Anita said, social anxiety disorders is the 3rd most prevalent mental health disorder after depression and alcoholism, affecting approximately 13% of the population at some point in their life.
Exactly.
And more prevalent in women by 2 to
Right.
1, you said.
Yeah.
However, men seek treatment at a rate of 2 to 1, probably due to professional reasons.
Right.
There are a number of contributing factors. Part of it is genetic, environmental, and our surroundings that may impact this. Most of the time it does not go away, so some sort of an intervention is necessary, and those interventions, as we talked about, could be seeing a therapist. You're being an expert in the field, an authority in the field. You recommend group therapy in this?
That's my recommendation, but I will say this because I know it's a big deal. A lot of people are too scared to step out of their home. So Dr. Thomas Richards, and I'll show his book, he actually has an entire, I think it's an online group. So for those who are too scared to come into person with someone, he has a wonderful program online. He's created a lot of peer groups internationally for, it's not necessarily therapist facilitated, but peer-to-peer. And there's an entire online program with videos and books. So I'm not trying to sell them, but this is something that I have found a lot of my clients tell me that they have.
That is effective, and that could be
helpful.
a self-help approach as well. And the point being here is that regardless of the approach, that something should be done.
Yeah.
Because, you know, in and by itself, it does not resolve and can lead to some pretty significant consequences, including suicide or suicide attempts.
Right.
Anita, thank you very much for coming. Anita Avedian again, Director of Anger Management 818, practices licensed marriage and family therapist and practices throughout California. You can look her up online. Again, thank you very much for being on our show.
Thank you for having me here, Dr.
We'll look
Sepilian.
forward for future episodes.
All right.
Thank you very much. We'll see you soon. Until we see you, stay healthy.
Անձավակության խնդիր ունեք, դիմեք փորձառու մասնագետ բժիշկ Վիգեն Սեպիլյանին։ Դոկտոր Վիգեն Սեպիլյանի ամլության բուժման կենտրոնը գտնվում է Գլենդելում, 1560 East Cheviches հասցեում։ Այստեղ կարող են դիմել երեխա ունենալու դժվարություններ ունեցող զույգերը։ Մի կորցրեք երջանիկ ծնող դառնալու ձեր հնարավորությունը։ Դիմեք Վիգեն Սեպիլյանին։ Ժամադրության համար զանգահարեք 818 303 6400 հեռախոսահամարով։